My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything I thought I knew about power, control, and survival. An ER nurse, someone who's seen car crashes, overdoses, and knife wounds, looked at me and said he'd never seen so much blood. But my boss Jerry? He thought I was being dramatic. I've been sitting on this story for months now, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by constant handling. Some stories demand to be told, not because they're unique, but because they're far too common. This is one of those stories. My name is Sarah Chan, I'm 34 years old, and until 8 months ago, I worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Seattle. I lived in a studio apartment that cost more than my parents' first mortgage, survived on coffee and determination, and believed that hard work would eventually pay off. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. This is a story about power. About control. About a man named Jerry who believed he owned not just your time, but your body, your health, your very right to survive. But more than that, it's about a system that allows people like Jerry to exist, to thrive, to make life and death decisions about people they see as nothing more than productivity metrics. You think you know workplace horror stories. You think you've heard about bad bosses. Maybe you've had one yourself, the micromanager, the screamer, the one who takes credit for your work. But what happens when your supervisor becomes the gatekeeper between you and medical care? When someone who's never been to medical school decides your symptoms aren't real? When your boss literally stands between you and the emergency room? This isn't just about one terrible boss named Jerry. It's about all the Jerrys. It's about a system that gives ordinary people extraordinary power over others' lives. And sometimes, that power literally becomes a matter of life and death. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, to a Tuesday morning in March that started like any other day but ended with me fighting for my life. I've always been what you might call a model employee. The type who arrives 15 minutes early, stays late without being asked, volunteers for projects no one else wants. My performance reviews were stellar. My coworkers liked me. I genuinely believed that if I just worked hard enough, proved myself valuable enough, I'd be safe. Protected. Valued. Jerry Patterson had been my supervisor for 2 years. He was the kind of man who wore his authority like an ill-fitting suit, constantly adjusting it, making sure everyone could see it. Mid-50s, thinning hair that he combed over with the desperation of someone clinging to his youth, and a habit of speaking just a little too loudly in meetings to ensure he commanded attention. Jerry had opinions about everything. The temperature in the office always too cold because people work better when they're slightly uncomfortable. The length of lunch breaks, 30 minutes is plenty if you're efficient. And women's health issues, which he seemed to believe were largely psychological and definitely inconvenient to the workplace. I should have seen the red flags earlier. Like when my colleague Maria mentioned she'd been denied time off for her daughter's surgery because Jerry deemed it not essential. Or when another coworker, Janet, was written up for taking too many bathroom breaks during her pregnancy. Jerry had a way of making medical needs feel like moral failings. But I was healthy then. I was young, strong, rarely sick. I thought Jerry's callousness toward others was unfortunate, but it would never affect me. I was wrong about that too. It started like any other day. I woke up feeling off, more tired than usual, but nothing I couldn't push through. That's what we do, isn't it? We push through. We show up. We prove we're dedicated employees, worthy of our paychecks, deserving of basic human dignity. I made my usual coffee, checked my emails, and headed to the office. The March rain was coming down in that relentless Seattle way, turning the world gray and soggy. I remember thinking the weather matched my mood, heavy, oppressive, like something was pressing down on my chest. But by mid-morning, something was wrong. Really wrong. The bleeding had been going on for weeks. Not unusual bleeding, I'm talking about something that made me dizzy, that had me changing protection every hour, that left me gripping bathroom stalls just to stay upright. I'd been telling myself it was stress, irregular cycles, maybe early perimenopause even though I was only 34. Women are taught to minimize their pain, to explain it away, to never be the squeaky wheel that demands attention. But that Tuesday morning, as I sat at my desk trying to focus on a client presentation, I felt something shift inside me. Not metaphorically, literally. Like something had torn loose, like my body was betraying me in the most fundamental way. I made it to the bathroom just as a wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to grab the sink to keep from falling. When I looked down, I understood that this wasn't stress or irregular cycles or anything I could push through. This was an emergency. I splashed cold water on my face, tried to steady my breathing, and walked back to my desk on shaking legs. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. "Jerry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to go to the emergency room." There was a pause. I could hear him typing, probably not even looking up from his computer. "Can't it wait until after your shift? Can't it wait?" As if my body was on his schedule. As if emergency rooms operate on corporate timelines. As if medical crises could be postponed for convenience. "No, Jerry. It really can't." More typing. I could picture him, irritated by the interruption, by the inconvenience of having an employee with actual human needs. "Well, what exactly is wrong with you? How do you explain to your male supervisor that you're bleeding so heavily you can barely stand? How do you make someone understand that this isn't about weakness or drama, this is about survival? How do you describe the terror of feeling your body spiral out of control to someone who sees you as nothing more than a productivity unit?" "I'm having a medical emergency," I said. "I need to go now." The typing stopped. I could hear him breathing, calculating, weighing my medical crisis against his daily agenda. "Sarah, we're really swamped today. The Morrison account presentation is due tomorrow, and frankly, I was counting on you to pull it together. Can't you take something for it and tough it out? Take something for it. Tough it out." As if Advil could stop whatever was happening inside my body. As if willpower could replace the blood I was losing. "Jerry, I think I need a hospital. Look, I get that you're feeling under the weather, but we've all got to make sacrifices." The presentation dash. "I'm bleeding heavily and I'm dizzy and I can't concentrate." Silence. Then, that's probably just women's issues, right? Stress can make those things worse. Maybe if you took a long lunch, got some fresh air. Women's issues. He'd reduced whatever was happening to me to women's issues, those mysterious, inconvenient biological functions that he neither understood nor wanted to deal with. "Jerry, I need to go to the emergency room. Now." Another pause. I could hear him drumming his fingers on his desk, the same rhythm he used when he was annoyed. "Fine. But make it quick. And Sarah? Try to be back by 3 if you can. We really need to nail down this presentation. Make it quick." As if I could schedule my medical crisis around quarterly reports. As if emergency rooms were like drive-through restaurants where you could order up a diagnosis and be back to work within the hour. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, staring at my computer screen. The Morrison presentation stared back at me, cursor blinking expectantly. Part of me, the part that had been trained to be a good employee, a team player, someone who never caused problems, actually considered staying. Actually wondered if maybe Jerry was right, if maybe I was overreacting. Then another wave of dizziness hit me, and I knew I had to choose between Jerry's expectations and my life. I chose my life. But here's where the story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming. Because Jerry wasn't done. Oh no, Jerry was just getting started on what would become the most horrific display of workplace abuse I could have imagined. The ER was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. I called my mom from the waiting room, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Mom, I'm at the hospital. Can you meet me here?" "Oh honey, what's wrong?" I tried to explain, but the words came out in fragments. Bleeding. Dizzy. Scared. My mom, bless her, didn't ask questions. "I'm on my way," she said, and I could hear her grabbing her keys through the phone. The triage nurse took one look at me and fast-tracked me through the system. That should have been my first clue about how serious this was. Emergency rooms are notorious for long waits, for making you sit for hours with a sprained ankle or a fever. When they rush you through, it means something is very, very wrong. The ER nurse was a man in his 50s, probably a veteran who'd seen everything you could imagine. Car accidents, overdoses, gunshot wounds, heart attacks, the full spectrum of human medical disasters. He took one look at me and his face changed. "We need to get you back immediately," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that made my stomach drop. They got me into a gown, into a bed, started in 4. The questions came rapid fire. When did this start? How much bleeding? Any pain? Any nausea? The nurse worked efficiently, professionally, but I could see something in his eyes, concern, maybe even alarm. That's when he said it. The words that still echo in my head, "I've never seen so much blood." Think about that for a moment. An emergency room nurse. Someone who deals with trauma victims, accident survivors, people at their absolute worst, and he was shocked by what he saw. This wasn't a man given to hyperbole or dramatics. This was a medical professional stating a fact that chilled me to the bone. The blood work came back quickly. Too quickly. In hospitals, speed usually means bad news. "We need to get you stabilized," the doctor said, a young woman who looked tired but focused. "You're going to need blood transfusions. Probably 2 units to start." 2 blood transfusions. That's what it took to stabilize me. 2 bags of someone else's blood pumping through my veins because I'd lost so much of my own. I watched the dark red liquid flow through the tubes, life literally being transfused back into my body, and thought about Jerry telling me to tough it out. I couldn't lift my head. Could barely keep my eyes open. The nurses moved around me with practiced efficiency, checking monitors, adjusting IVs, speaking in medical shorthand that I couldn't follow but understood meant trouble. My mom arrived looking panicked, her hair still messy from rushing out of the house. She took one look at me, pale, weak, hooked up to machines, and I saw her face crumble. "Oh, baby," she whispered, taking my hand. "What happened?" I tried to explain, but talking was exhausting. The doctors were talking about admitting me, about running more tests, about the serious nature of what was happening to my body. Words like hemorrhaging and unstable floated through the air like birds of prey. And that's when my mom's phone rang. "Hi, Jerry," she answered, and I could hear his voice through the speaker from across the room. Even in my weakened state, I felt a jolt of anxiety. Jerry was calling my mother. My boss was calling my mother while I was in the emergency room receiving blood transfusions. How is she? When is she coming back to work? When is she coming back to work? I was lying in a hospital bed, my life hanging in the balance, and Jerry's primary concern was my return to the office. My mother, bless her, tried to explain. Hospital. Blood transfusions. Serious condition. Doctors running tests. Her voice carried that particular tone mothers use when they're trying to be polite while internally screaming. But Jerry had his own medical opinion, it's just stress. She needs to get back to work. Work will help her feel better. Sitting around thinking about it will just make it worse. Let me paint you a picture here. I'm lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, receiving someone else's blood to replace what I'd lost, and my boss is diagnosing me over the phone. Prescribing work as the cure for a medical emergency that required immediate hospitalization. My mom looked at me, then at the monitors, then at the 4 bags hanging beside my bed. "Jerry, she can't even lift her head right now. The doctors say dash. Well, she needs to try harder. We're really busy right now, and the Morrison presentation isn't going to finish itself. Maybe if she just pushed through this mental block." Mental block. He'd reduced my medical emergency to a mental block. As if I was choosing to hemorrhage, choosing to need blood transfusions, choosing to be weak and pale and fighting for my life. "She needs to try harder," my mom repeated slowly, and I could hear the ice forming in her voice. My mother was a kindergarten teacher, a woman who'd dedicated her life to caring for others, and she was hearing my boss tell a woman in the emergency room to try harder. "Look, I understand she's feeling under the weather," Jerry continued, apparently oblivious to the absurdity of his words, "but we all have responsibilities. This presentation is critical for the company. Sarah knows how important this account is." Under the weather. I was under the weather. Like I had a case of the sniffles instead of a life-threatening medical condition. My mom hung up without saying goodbye. "What an absolute piece of garbage," she muttered, and I'd never heard my sweet, patient mother use language like that before. But here's the thing about Jerry, he wasn't done playing doctor. I spent 3 days in the hospital. 3 days of tests, blood draws, ultrasounds, and consultations with specialists who spoke in hushed tones and exchanged meaningful looks over my chart. My mom stayed with me, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside my bed, making sure I wasn't alone when the doctors delivered news that ranged from concerning to terrifying. The bleeding had stabilized, but the doctors found something that made them exchange those looks, you know, the ones. The looks that happen over your body but never quite include you in the conversation. Medical professionals have a way of communicating bad news through facial expressions before they find the words to tell you directly. A growth. Large enough to require immediate attention. Concerning enough that they used words like suspicious and irregular. The kind of growth that required a biopsy, more tests, more waiting. They scheduled a D&C procedure for the following week. Dilation and curettage, a surgical procedure to remove tissue from inside the uterus. The doctor explained it in clinical terms, but what she was really saying was that they needed to cut into me to figure out what was trying to kill me. I was discharged on a Friday with strict instructions to rest, to take it easy, to let my body recover from the trauma it had endured. No lifting, no strenuous activity, and definitely no work until cleared by my physician. Jerry called me at home that weekend. "So, feeling better?" he asked, as if I'd recovered from a hangover rather than a medical emergency that required hospitalization. "I'm recovering," I said carefully. "The doctors want me to rest." "Good, good. So you'll be in Monday then?" I stared at the phone. "Jerry, I have a procedure scheduled for next week. The doctors found something that needs to be biopsied." "Biopsied? What kind of something?" The question felt invasive, inappropriate. My medical information wasn't his business, but somehow Jerry had appointed himself as the arbiter of what constituted legitimate illness. "They need to do more tests," I said, exhausted by the conversation already. "Well, it can't be cancer," Jerry announced with the confidence of someone who'd apparently earned a medical degree overnight. "If it was cancer, you'd be tired and losing weight. You look fine to me. You look fine to me." He hadn't even seen me since before my hospitalization, but somehow he'd diagnosed me through the phone. "Actually, Jerry, I have been tired. And I have lost weight." "How much weight?" The question was so personal, so inappropriate, that I almost hung up. But I was still in employee mode, still conditioned to answer my boss's questions, no matter how invasive. 8 pounds. In a week. 8 pounds isn't that much. Stress can cause weight loss. And everyone's tired these days, it's a busy time at work. Tired? I was going to bed the moment I got home from the hospital when I was strong enough to be home. I'd been falling asleep sitting up, struggling to keep my eyes open long enough to eat. This wasn't everyone's tired, this was the exhaustion of someone whose body was fighting a war I didn't understand yet. Losing weight? 8 pounds had fallen off my body like my health was literally dissolving. I could see my ribs in the mirror, could wrap my fingers around my wrist in a way that had never been possible before. My clothes hung loose, my face looked gaunt, but Dr. Jerry, apparently, had made his diagnosis. Not cancer. Just stress. Just a woman being dramatic about her lady problems. "So you'll be back to work Monday?" he pressed. "I have a procedure scheduled for Tuesday. The doctor said I need to rest." "What kind of procedure?" Again with the invasive questions. Again with the assumption that my medical information was his business. A surgical procedure to test for cancer, I said bluntly, hoping the word would shock him into understanding the seriousness of the situation. Oh. A pause. Well, how long will that take? How long will that take? As if I was getting a haircut instead of surgery to determine if I had a life-threatening disease. I don't know, Jerry. It depends on what they find. Well, try to schedule it for early in the morning so you can still get a half day in. I hung up on him. What happened next will stay with me forever. Not just because of the cruelty of it, but because of the timing. Because of how close Jerry came to being catastrophically, unforgivably wrong in the worst possible way. The DNC procedure was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I'd never had surgery before, and I was terrified. My mom drove me to the hospital at 6 a.m., both of us quiet with anxiety. The pre-op nurses were kind, explaining each step, trying to keep me calm as they prepped me for surgery. "We'll take good care of you," the anesthesiologist said, and those were the last words I remembered before the medication pulled me under. I woke up groggy and sore, my throat dry from the breathing tube. The recovery nurse checked my vitals, offered me ice chips, explained that the procedure had gone well. They'd removed the tissue they needed for testing, and now we had to wait for results. "The doctor will be in to see you shortly," she said, which in hospital time meant anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours. I was still in recovery, still wearing a hospital gown, still connected to monitors, when my cell phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. I was exhausted, medicated, barely conscious. But the name on the screen made my stomach drop. "Jerry." I answered without thinking, still groggy from anesthesia. "Sarah? Good, you're awake. We need to talk. We need to talk." Every employee knows those words. They're never followed by good news, never lead to conversations about raises or promotions. They're the 4 words that precede pink slips and performance reviews and corporate restructuring. My heart sank, even through the post-surgical fog. I knew that tone. "Jerry, I'm still in recovery. The procedure just finished." "Right, about that. You've taken too much time off. This isn't working out. We're going to have to let you go." Let me repeat that. While I was recovering from surgery to biopsy a suspicious growth, while still connected to hospital monitors, while waiting to find out if I had cancer, my boss fired me for seeking medical care for a life-threatening condition. The words hit me like ice water. Even through the medication, even in my weakened state, I understood the magnitude of what was happening. "Jerry, I'm waiting for test results. The doctors think." I don't want to hear excuses. This is a business decision. You've been unreliable, taking excessive time off, and frankly, your attitude about work hasn't been what we expect from our employees. Unreliable. Excessive time off. For being hospitalized. For needing blood transfusions. For having surgery to determine if I had cancer. My attitude about work. Because I'd prioritized not dying over finishing the Morrison presentation. "Jerry, I might have cancer. You don't know that. And even if you do, we can't run a business around everyone's medical problems. This is a workplace, not a charity. A business decision." My potential cancer diagnosis was a business decision. My life was a line item that didn't fit in the budget. "When will you know?" he asked, and for a moment, I thought he was showing a shred of human decency. I thought maybe, despite everything, he cared about the answer. I was wrong. "The results should come back in about a week," I said through the post-surgical haze. "Well, you're terminated effective immediately. Good luck with whatever this turns out to be. HR will mail you your final paperwork. Whatever this turns out to be." Cancer was whatever this turns out to be. The line went dead, and I lay there in the recovery room, staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to process what had just happened. I'd been fired while recovering from surgery. Fired for seeking medical care. Fired by a man who'd spent weeks dismissing my symptoms, minimizing my condition, and diagnosing me through the phone. The recovery nurse came back to check on me and found me crying. "Honey, what's wrong? Are you in pain?" I couldn't explain that the pain wasn't physical. I couldn't tell her that my boss had just fired me for having the audacity to prioritize staying alive over corporate productivity. I couldn't describe the humiliation, the fear, the absolute helplessness of being terminated while lying in a hospital bed. "I just lost my job," I whispered. She looked confused. "Today? While you're here?" I nodded, and she shook her head in disgust. "Some people," she muttered, adjusting my blankets with extra gentleness, "have no humanity left in them." 5 days. That's how long I had to sit with Jerry's words. 5 days of wondering not just if I had cancer, but how I was going to afford treatment without insurance. 5 days of Jerry's voice echoing in my head, "It can't be cancer." 5 days of unemployment and uncertainty and terror. I spent those 5 days researching COBRA benefits, calling patient advocates, trying to figure out how to navigate a potential cancer diagnosis without employer-sponsored health insurance. I spent them thinking about Jerry's confident diagnosis, his dismissal of my symptoms, his absolute certainty that I was just being dramatic. I spent them wondering if he was right. If maybe I was overreacting, if maybe this was all just stress and anxiety manifesting as physical symptoms. Maybe Jerry knew something I didn't. Maybe I was just weak, unable to handle the normal pressures of adult life. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I knew that emergency room nurses don't say they've never seen so much blood unless something is seriously wrong. Deep down, I knew that doctors don't schedule emergency surgery for stress. "We need you to come in to discuss your results." That's how doctors tell you. They don't say it over the phone. They don't leave voicemails with your diagnosis. They ask you to come in, and you know. You know before you walk through the door, before you sit down in the chair across from their desk, before they open your file and clear their throat. You know. The oncologist's office was nothing like the emergency room. Quiet. Calm. The kind of place where life-changing news gets delivered in measured, professional tones. The waiting room had soft lighting and classical music, as if ambience could soften the blow of devastating diagnoses. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands. She'd probably delivered this news hundreds of times, but she treated each case like it was the first, like each patient deserved her full attention and compassion. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but the biopsy came back positive. You have cancer." Cancer. The word Jerry said couldn't possibly apply to me because I wasn't tired enough, wasn't losing weight fast enough. The diagnosis he'd dismissed with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced their own mortality. "It's endometrial cancer," Dr. Martinez continued, "but we caught it early. Stage 1. The prognosis is very good with proper treatment." Early. Stage 1. Good prognosis. The words floated through my mind, but all I could hear was Jerry's voice, "It can't be cancer." "What does treatment look like?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Surgery first. A hysterectomy to remove the affected tissue. Then possibly chemotherapy, depending on what we find during surgery. The important thing is that we caught this early, thanks to you advocating for yourself and seeking immediate medical attention. Thanks to me advocating for myself. Thanks to me ignoring Jerry's diagnosis, his instructions to tough it out, his insistence that this was just stress and women's issues." "Doctor," I said, "if I had waited, if I hadn't gone to the emergency room when I did." She looked at me seriously. "The bleeding you experienced was life-threatening. If you had waited much longer, we might be having a very different conversation." Life-threatening. Jerry had told me to tough out a life-threatening condition. Had insisted I finish a presentation while my body was in crisis. Had fired me for seeking treatment that literally saved my life. So here I was. Diagnosed with cancer 5 days after being fired for seeking medical care. Sitting in an oncologist's office, discussing treatment options and survival rates, while my former boss was probably congratulating himself on avoiding the hassle of dealing with a sick employee. But this story isn't really about Jerry, is it? It's about all the Jerrys. It's about a system that gives people like him power over people like us. It's about the casual cruelty that masquerades as business efficiency. Jerry thought he was protecting his business from an unreliable employee. What he was actually doing was firing someone for having cancer, for needing medical care, for having the audacity to prioritize staying alive over staying profitable. Think about how close he came to being responsible for something unthinkable. What if I had listened to him? What if I had tried harder and gone back to work instead of going to the emergency room? What if I had trusted his medical opinion over actual medical professionals? What if his confident diagnosis, "it can't be cancer," had convinced me to delay treatment? What if his insistence that I was just being dramatic had made me second-guess my own body's distress signals? The ER nurse who said he'd never seen so much blood, he was right to be concerned. The doctors who found the growth, they were right to be worried. The oncologist who delivered my diagnosis, she was right to take it seriously. But Jerry? Jerry was wrong. Catastrophically, dangerously, potentially fatally wrong. I survived. Both the cancer and Jerry. The surgery was successful, the chemotherapy effective, and my prognosis remains excellent. But not everyone does. Not everyone has the strength to advocate for themselves when they're too weak to lift their head. Not everyone has family who can fight for them when they can't fight for themselves. This story isn't unique. Right now, somewhere, there's another Jerry making medical decisions for employees. Another person being told their symptoms aren't serious enough to warrant time off. Another human being caught between survival and a paycheck. I learned later that what Jerry did was illegal. Firing someone for seeking medical care violates the Family and Medical Leave Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and basic human decency. I could have sued, could have fought back, could have made him pay for his cruelty. But I was focused on staying alive. On recovering from surgery, enduring chemotherapy, rebuilding my life after cancer tried to destroy it. I didn't have the energy to fight Jerry in court when I was fighting for my life in treatment rooms. Jerry probably doesn't think about me anymore. He probably doesn't even remember my name. I was just another HR problem, another employee who couldn't handle the demands of the job. Another woman being dramatic about her lady problems. But I remember Jerry. I remember every dismissive comment, every time he minimized my pain, every moment he prioritized productivity over my life. I remember his voice telling my mother that I needed to try harder while I was receiving blood transfusions. I remember him firing me while I was still connected to hospital monitors. I remember because Jerry represents something larger, something more dangerous than just one terrible boss. He represents a system that treats human beings as disposable resources, that values productivity over people, that gives ordinary individuals the power to make life and death decisions about others' medical care. Jerry had no medical training, no understanding of women's health issues, no comprehension of what I was experiencing. But he had authority, and he wielded it like a weapon against someone who was already suffering. So this is for every person who's been told they're being dramatic about their health. For everyone who's been made to choose between their job and their life. For anyone who's ever had a Jerry. Your health matters more than their business. Your life matters more than their bottom line. And no one, no matter how much authority they think they have, gets to decide whether your medical emergency is real. Trust your body. Trust medical professionals. Don't let anyone convince you that your pain isn't valid, that your symptoms aren't serious, that you should tough it out for the good of the company. Companies are not people. They don't bleed, they don't suffer, they don't die. But you do. You are human, you are fragile, you are precious. And you deserve medical care when you need it, regardless of how inconvenient it might be for your employer. Jerry thought he owned me. Thought he could control my access to healthcare, could diagnose my condition through the phone, could fire me for the crime of seeking medical attention. He was wrong about all of it. Fuck you, Jerry. Fuck you for thinking you owned my body. Fuck you for playing doctor with my life. Fuck you for making me choose between survival and employment. Fuck you for calling my mother while I was in the emergency room to complain about productivity. Fuck you for firing me while I was recovering from surgery. And fuck you for being wrong. Wrong about my diagnosis, wrong about my prognosis, wrong about what my body needed, wrong about everything that mattered. I chose survival. I chose to trust medical professionals over corporate managers. I chose to prioritize my life over your presentations and your deadlines and your business decisions. I'm alive, Jerry. Despite your best efforts to convince me otherwise, despite your attempts to minimize my condition, despite your cruel indifference to my suffering, I'm alive. And I'm here to tell this story. To warn others about people like you. To remind everyone that no job is worth dying for, no boss has the right to practice medicine without a license, and no company deserves your life in exchange for a paycheck. My name is Sarah Chen. I survived cancer, and I survived Jerry. This is my story, and I'm not done telling it.